let's start with the story of the beginning. In the beginning was? Yeah. So in every tradition there is this understanding that in the beginning was this word, that the creation began as this reverberation, this resonance. And that the whole process of creation is this process of the overtones from that original word reflecting and ramifying and interpenetrating with each other. And that our practice and our path is to hear that original word, which is, as all mystics have said, is constantly being uttered. It's a sustaining utterance, as our Guru has said. It's always being uttered in silence. So this projecting of this word, this movement of the word forward into form, we call it in modern words, it produces evolution, which has been confused, I think, with the notion of improvement. It's really not improvement. We say, we're at the next evolution of the software program, like it's getting better or something like that. Evolution is really simply the unpackaging of all of those potentialities, all of those possibilities that were encoded in that original silent word. And so there's an infinite number of potentials hidden in silence. Now, one of my favorite narratives in the Kriya Yoga teachings is how we entered into this music in the first place. That's always a question. How do we get into this thing? That's a question we have. It's an ongoing question. How did we get here? How did we enter into this dream of God, as we understand it in our tradition? And I always love this image that we have entered in to learn the method, of the dreamer. Or in the metaphor of communication, as we're talking tonight, we've entered into creation to learn how to sing, to learn how to utter a sustaining utterance. Because we knew we had songs within us, we knew we had music within us, but it was all coming out in a discordant fashion. Worlds were colliding. You remember that from Seinfeld? George said, worlds are colliding. Well, this is the thing. We had this experience that our worlds were not sustaining. We were not able to sustain the music in harmony. And so we entered into this dreamer's dream. I'm mostly going to talk about listening tonight as a prelude to being able to sing again. So learning to listen first before being able to again project your voice. We thought perhaps that by entering into this dream, by learning to listen to the music, by learning to listen deeply to the voice of the dreamer and the way that the dreamer projected his, her, its song, that we would learn to harmonize with that and therefore find our own song. So another way to say this is that we've entered into we chose to enter into a conversation with life, God, Spirit, whatever you wish. We've entered into this learning conversation. And according to the story, as I understand it, we became lost in the music. It's quite entrancing. It's very interesting and very compelling. There's a park near our house where people go to walk their dogs. And on Sundays, every month, they have a drumming circle. You know about these things? And they have this, you can feel it, and people kind of are walking the dogs and you see them It draws them across the park, the beat, the rhythm. They forget what they were there for. According to the story, we forgot what we came for. We lost track of our intention. We lost track of our listening, our really deep listening, and we just became, absorbed and in the complexity of the memory. Sorry, that's true too. Melody, mixing metaphors. And in that complexity, we became involved in the music in a way that subsumed us in a series, an ever-contracting series of sub-themes. You know how in music there's the idea, what key is this in? You know that, if you're not even a musician, it's like this is in the key of C or this is in the key of A. Even if A isn't being played, it's in the key of A. It's not that the note A is being played all the time, but it's in the key of A, which is to say there's this thing, this silence really, around which everything is organized and gives it coherence. And that's what we were trying to listen for, to hear, that the silent organizing sound. But we got all involved in all these themes. Like in a Star Wars movie, how every character has a theme, a little, if Darth Vader's coming because there's a certain dun, dun, dun sound, and dun, 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 the good guys are coming. Well, we got all absorbed in these sub-themes. So that's where we find ourselves, absorbed in sub-themes, fascinated by tuning the theme, getting the theme perfect, working on the theme, making variations on the theme. Keep variations on the theme. Maybe if I make more variations on this theme, it'll all work out. So Nasruddin, Nasruddin? Some of you know, yeah? Nasruddin is this trickster figure, not unlike Hanuman, this trickster figure from the Middle East. It's a wonderful story of Nasruddin. He got a flute, and he took his flute, and he was practicing his flute in his house. He took his flute, and he was... Just playing this one note endlessly. His wife is driving his wife insane. And she said, Nasruddin, stop. All the other people who have flutes, they play all over the flute. And Nasruddin said, I know. That's because they are looking for this one note. Right. So this is where we find ourselves. I'm like that. I hope you know, maybe you're not, but maybe you relate. You're like this person who's looking all over the flute for the note. But at some point, you wouldn't be here. At some point in your path, at some point in your life experience, you heard the note. You heard it. And changed your whole life. Now, in the Zen tradition, this is the glimpse, right? You see the ox. Oh, there's the ox. But we heard this note, and it's just like it's just a hint, perhaps. It could even be the subtlest hint, but it totally reorients your life experience. And you now remember why you got here in the first place. But as the story said, it's hard to remember. That's a hard thing to do. But you do remember for an instant, and you have the experience of being in communication with life. And that's what you want. You want to be in communication. And you remember that. But that doesn't mean all the sub-themes suddenly dissolve away. They continue to play. They have their own momentum. I think this moment of hearing, I told you it's all going to be the same talk, does occur beautifully in the Bhagavad Gita. It's that moment, I think of it as this Arjuna moment. We all have these, I could have had a V8. It's an Arjuna moment. It's the moment when Arjuna falls on his knees and says, I give up. It's the moment when he sees everything that I have understood, my history, my current understanding, my habitual self, my well-worn ways of winning. They're not going to work. They're not going to work anymore. Life is bigger than my understanding. I'm facing life. He's facing life. He's facing his life directly, and it becomes clear to him that life is bigger than his contracted understanding. That's a pretty intense moment. We've all had that moment. Many times, I'm sure. And that's the beginning of his conversation. That's the beginning of the transformational conversation that he has with Krishna, Lord Krishna. And there's been a moment in your life, probably many moments, where you said, one moment where you heard the note, and another moment, it's kind of partner moment where you realized life is bigger than my contracted understanding. And so then you were ready to be in a conversation, be in communication. So what is a Kriya communication? It is a communicating in a way that transforms the relationship between the knower and the known. That's it. That a Kriya communication is communicating in such a way that it transforms the relationship between the knower and the known. Because every communication is a relationship between a knower and a known, or a self and an other. And the aim of this transformational communication is to have a complete communication. A complete communication. A complete communication. I am repeating the last lecture. A complete communication is the unimpeded revelation of being, consciousness, and bliss. That's a complete communication. Everything else is an impeded communication. Yeah, a contracted communication. And this complete communication, what the teachings tell us, is available. This unimpeded revelation of being, consciousness, and bliss is available in every event, encounter, or experience. If we are willing to have a complete communication. Most of the time, I know I am unwilling to have a complete communication. Nonetheless, it is available. Because it has to be available, because life is omnipresent. It's always available. And it's in all space, in all time, it's in all times, in all spaces, so it's always available to have that communication. It's in all states, in all stages. Kabir says, wherever you are is the entry point. So you're somewhere in time and space. And wherever that is, that's the entry point. We think we need to change our situation to have an entry point. Make, the altar more perfect. Reorganize the furniture. Become thinner. Learn a foreign language. Whatever it might be. We think we need to improve somehow to have an entry point. Perhaps to have an entry point is the beginning of that improvement that Kiryananda spoke of. Complete the communication wherever you are. How? By removing the impediments to a complete communication. complete the communication. It's a circular argument. By removing the impediments to the complete revelation of Satchidananda. Isn't it wonderful when we read the stories of the Zen masters, the Zen meditators, and they're sitting and they have a complete communication. A sound of a tile breaking is an opening to total understand, to full awareness, to a complete conversation with life. So, it's a process of removing the impediments. Neti, neti, neti. It's removing the impediments to the revelation. We cannot create the revelation. Otherwise, it would be a sub-theme. We can create the sub-theme, but we cannot create the silence, the key. The key is there. So, you would not be in the room if you had not had this experience also. You realize the entry point in the presence of the Guru. There was a time in your personal history when you met the Guru physically for the first time. You may have seen the Guru, you may have listened to the Guru, you may have encountered the Guru. But there was a time when you had a complete communication. And that was the entry point, the moment of entrance into the true conversation with life. You hear the teachings. You remember the conversation that you dropped so long ago. You return to listening deeply. And you reclaim your purpose and your identity. You glimpse it. And as you listen to the teachings, you realize they're true. You know they're true. You know them all. You heard them all. You're just being, I know that. I know exactly what's next. And what's next, and what's next, and what's next. That is a complete communication. But there is momentum. The sub-themes continue. Do they not? They continue. I remember so many years coming to the temple, so many Sundays, decades, and I would sit in Sundays and sit for hours, 10 o'clock meditation, 12 o'clock meditation, 2 o'clock lecture, 3:30 discipleship. So that's like 8 hours, you know. Be sitting and having, flowing in and out of conversation with the Guru, flowing in and out, and touching, in our traditional words, the outer fringes of samadhi, experiencing complete communication. Oh, I'm having a complete communication. So lovely. And then falling out, falling in, falling out. You know this experience. And then leaving the temple and walking across the little grass, island to go onto Kedsi to my car. Before I got to my car, I noticed this, but I had no control over it. It's all bullshit. This is crazy. My Virgo would just reinstate itself and begin tearing apart to shreds the inconsistencies and thinking it's all hopeless. There's nothing. I would return to the conflict-ridden mind, the mind that could not sustain the utterance. So, as Kiryananda said today, the path is a step-ladder process. It's a progressive process. The entry point is instantaneous, but the sustaining seems to be a progressive process of reducing the impediments by releasing the defenses by which we restrict the complete communication. What I understood over these last weeks is that karma is incomplete communication. That karma is incomplete communication. When you complete the communication, the karma is complete, dissolved. Now, some stages. The lowest level of communication with life is where life appears to present itself to you and to me as events alone. That's the lowest level of communication with life, when life appears as events. Highly impeded communication, drained of meaning, filled with struggle. Even pleasure in the context of this is struggle. Although it can be interrupted by periods of, what's the word? Slumber. Yeah, that's the word. There appears to be little meaning, order, or purpose to the sequence of events. We see no connection between consciousness and experience, between our inner life, in other words, and our outer conditions. We've just contracted ourselves into, actually, as Kiryananda calls it, a living dead state. And we don't know we're living dead. All we know is life appears to be dead around us. That's the quality of the communication. But we heard the teachings, we absorbed, we were brought to the pathway, we begin to study and practice, and we learn this wonderful tool, which you'll hear about next, which is this tool to begin to listen more deeply to what appears to be random events. But we start to listen. Seems to be random people who are bothering me, harassing me, and not obeying me. What a problem. It's astrology. It gives us a method for discerning a pattern of energy that lies beneath the structure of the event, the surface events. And it reveals to us in the teachings, in its beauty, it reveals to us this energetic matrix, which is coherent, out of which events are arising. And it shows us a way, at first, intellectually, right? It's a cognitive practice first, is that right? I mean, that's why I go, oh, I have to memorize. That means your brain. It gives us a cognitive way of discerning this message. But it's cognitive alone at first. And to receive a transmission. The line is open, starts to open. It depends, I will briefly talk about this because you're going to hear more about this. It all depends on how we interpret the message. This is always the case. Astrology will not interpret it for you. Not, is Mars a knife? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the meta-interpretation that you make, the interpretation you make about whether it's an event or not. Because I'm suggesting to you it's not an event. Because as you move into the practice, you begin to experience that what you thought was an event is actually a person. A person called Jupiter, a person called Saturn, a person called Venus, a person called Mercury, a person called the Sun. It's a person. It's alive. It's a person. And you can now communicate. You can begin to communicate because it's a person. What is a person? It's a good question, isn't it? What's a person? I'll make a suggestion. A person is a center of subjectivity. A person is an entity that experiences I am. When you realize that what you are encountering is a person, what you realize is that which is arising before you experiences I am. It's alive, in other words. What a wonderful thing. See, as you experience it's a person, here's the beauty of communication. That means you are starting to become aware that you're a person. You were dead before. Now you're a person. You didn't exist. You were just one of the events. Now you're a person. And you can now communicate with another person. But what you learn at this juncture in the development, what you realize is that your center of subjectivity, I'm going to go quickly now, your center of subjectivity is structured around a memory track that's different from the center memory track of that other person. Yeah? And you can communicate with that other memory track. That's nice. This transforms your relationship of the knower and the known. You're in communication now. And in that, you are transformed. You are transformed because you've now linked. You understand, right? You've now linked to that memory track. So, we experience this initial glimpse. It says right here, I have no idea what that sentence means. In blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. The relationship to the guru. That's what we're talking about. As a paradigm for having a complete communication. You see, I'm going to just jump right ahead here. And yeah. When we first glimpsed complete communication with a guru, it was very satisfying. It's exactly what happened in that story with Hanuman. The whole mountain came and healed all the wounds. That's what happens. All the wounds are healed in that moment of complete communication. But it's a state. That's the thing. It's a state. It's not a sustained utterance yet. You're not uttering anything. You're just listening for a moment. And all the parts of you that are wounded, all those warriors, that are running around the battlefield, all those parts are healed like that. Boom. But it doesn't sustain itself. And they remember that they were healed. They force you to come back to the temple. They bring you back. They know all the other places you go don't work. They want to be in that conversation. They want to be in that conversation. The problem is that they don't, how to say this? They experience the medicine through their own filter. It said in this prayer, Guru, first line, Guru is like mother and father. You been getting those emails? Write down all these words about your mother and father. I wonder what that's all about. So, this is a particularly important moment. I don't know about you, but there were lots of parts inside of me that hoped Kiryananda was my father. I was looking for a perfect parent. I don't know how many of you were. It's fine. It's no problem. It's just a stage of development. But if you enter into a relationship, if you reach the point where you at least sense that that other being is actually a person, what's going to happen is all of those projections from those parts of you that demand healing, they will arise and they will bounce off of that mirror. You know what I'm talking about? If you don't, you're lucky, okay? They will arise and they will bounce off of that mirror. See, so I was born with the sun in the 12th house. Seemed like when I went to temple for decades, it's like everybody had everything in the 12th house. But I don't know if that's true for all of you. But what is that? That can mean many things. But it certainly means that the sun, as a symbol of father, was submerged somewhere in the unconscious. It was hidden. And in fact, my father left when I was months old. All part of the narrative at different levels. Nothing cancels anything out. They're all just different refractions of the story. I had a recurring dream as a child, and it made no sense to me because I had been adopted when I was just under a year old. But I had a recurring dream that I was waiting in a vestibule in a temple, and inside the temple was my real father. And I knew he was going to come out sooner or later, and I'd wake up and I'd think, what was that all about? That was an attempt to complete a communication. That's what a recurring dream is. That's what your life is. It's a recurring dream. You keep coming back to the same conversation. Have you noticed that? Over and over and over again. With Kiryananda, with your significant other, with your boss, all these people. With these significant symbols in your life. But the Guru is an ultimate symbol of everything. Father, mother, lover, everything. All the projections can be catalyzed in that relationship and therefore made conscious. So, that's a blessing. If you're willing to be in a complete communication. All people would leave. I would see this. Deborah and I were here for decades. The people would leave. They'd come. They'd do, the most amazing person. He's the most amazing. And then they'd be gone. I could not understand that sequence. But they usually were angry, which was very interesting. They were usually angry. Not them. The part of them that demanded the medicine in its form, that it only would accept it in its form that it wanted it in. But if we continue, I'm going to fast forward here. If we continue, it says here, this is wonderful. Yes, this is good. Kriya, practicing Kriya, circulating the light, rotating the light, rotating the light, rotating the light. What happens when we rotate the light is what? That the center of attention, the bindu, the center of attention now moves out of our habitual, constricted, restrictive vantage point. And it takes every vantage point. In Kriya, you don't really privilege any vantage point. We pause briefly at the sun center. Why? The least dangerous is what we are told. Wow. But we're not privileging any vantage point. And what happens when we don't privilege any vantage point is we get to have a complete communication. Because anything that arises, we now can experience from every vantage point. So you can meditate on that. And as that occurs, we reorganize as a universal being. We become not the person Eric for a moment in time. We become the universal person. You understand? We lose we lose that unique, angular, skewed version of the universal energies, and we return it to a complete mandala. And in the mandala of existence, there's nothing to be defended against. I mean, that's the nature of the mandala. You can only need to defend from a fixed vantage point. Squares only exist from a fixed vantage point, and oppositions only exist from a fixed vantage point. If you have no fixed vantage point, You can't have squares and oppositions. There's nothing to defend against. So you have a complete communication. And everything that arises is also complete and reflects back that completeness. Ishaya Upanishad. So we have this experience now of merging our center with the center of life. We hear the organizing principle. And then everything that arises, it's no longer an event. It's not even a person. It's an emanation. It's an ornament on Lakshmi's earrings. It's beautiful. And the wondrous thing about it is everything's included in the mandala. You remember the story? This is one of my most favorite. And Yogananda was in God consciousness. And Shelley said, were you in God consciousness? Yes, I was in God consciousness. Deepest God consciousness, yes. Deepest. Total God consciousness, total God consciousness. Completely merged, completely merged. Where were you then? And he said, Mukunda was still there, right? Remember that? What a wonderful story. Only the contracted self wants to escape. That's it. Life doesn't want to escape itself. Correct? Where else would it go? Hermann Hesse. We've only been talking about listening. We'll end with this poem. Sometimes when a bird cries out, or the wind sweeps through a tree, or a dog howls in a far-off farm, I hold still and listen for a long, long time. My soul turns and goes to the place where 1,000 forgotten years ago, the bird and the blowing wind were like me and were my brothers. My soul turns into a tree and an animal and a cloud bank, and then, changed and odd, comes home and asks me questions. What should I reply? Namaste.